My dearest viewers, history buffs, and truth seekers, welcome back to the channel where we unravel the tangled threads of the past and present. Today, we dive headfirst into a conflict that has reshaped our world, ignited global fears, and brought the chilling specter of war back to Europe in a way we thought impossible. This isn't just a news report, it's a journey into the heart of a geopolitical storm, a story of nations, identities, and the brutal consequences of power. We're talking, of course, about the Russia-Ukraine war. Forget what you think you know. Forget the headlines. Today, we're stripping back the layers, exploring the deep, dark roots, the desperate struggles, and the shocking turns of events that have led us to this very moment. From ancient grudges to modern battlefields, this is the full, unvarnished story. From the very beginning to the current, nail-biting situation. Prepare yourselves, because this isn't just history. It's a real-life thriller, a testament to human resilience, and a chilling reminder of how quickly peace can shatter. To understand the present, we must first confront the past. The story of Russia and Ukraine is not a simple one. It's a complex tapestry woven with shared heritage, brutal conflicts, and diverging aspirations. Imagine two brothers, born from the same ancient lineage, yet destined for vastly different futures. Our journey begins over 1,000 years ago in a land known as Chivan Rus. This was the cradle of East Slavic civilization, a powerful medieval state centered around the city of Kiev, the very heart of modern Ukraine. Both Russia and Ukraine trace their origins to this common ancestor. They shared language, culture, and Orthodox Christianity. For centuries, their destinies were intertwined. But history is rarely linear. As centuries rolled by, external powers carved up these lands. Parts of Ukraine fell under the sway of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, others under the Ottoman Empire, and eventually, much of it was absorbed into the expanding Russian Empire. This period saw the emergence of a distinct Ukrainian identity, often suppressed, often resisting. They developed their own language, their own Cossack traditions, fierce, independent warriors who yearned for autonomy. The 20th century brought even more turmoil. After the Russian revolutions of 1917, Ukraine briefly declared independence. A flicker of self-determination quickly snuffed out as it was absorbed into the Soviet Union. This wasn't a peaceful union. The Soviet era brought immense suffering, most notably the Holodomor in the early 1930s, a man-made famine orchestrated by Stalin that starved millions of Ukrainians. It was a deliberate act of terror, burned into the collective memory of the Ukrainian people, a stark reminder of Moscow's iron grip. World War II brought further devastation, but also a complex legacy of both collaboration and resistance against Soviet rule. When the Soviet Union finally crumbled in 1991, Ukraine seized its moment. In a resounding referendum, Ukrainians voted overwhelmingly for independence, a clear declaration of their desire to forge their own path, distinct from Moscow. For a time, relations were relatively calm. There were agreements, like the Budapest Memorandum in 1994, where Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons, the third largest arsenal in the world at the time, in exchange for security assurances from Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom. A promise, a guarantee, that would soon be shattered. If you've made it this far, you're clearly as captivated by history as I am. Don't let the story end here. Please take a moment to hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and tap the bell icon so you don't miss any of our future deep dives. Your support keeps these investigations going. As the 21st century dawned, a new geopolitical game began to unfold. Ukraine, a newly independent nation nestled between East and West, faced a profound choice. Would it lean towards Russia, its powerful former master, or pivot towards the democratic institutions of Europe and the West, the European Union and NATO? From Russia's perspective, this westward lean was a direct threat. They saw NATO, a military alliance formed to counter the Soviet Union, expanding steadily eastward, absorbing former Warsaw Pact nations and even Baltic states that were once part of the USSR. For Moscow, this was a breach of unwritten understandings, an encirclement, a dagger pointed at their heart. They viewed Ukraine, with its long border and historical ties, as a crucial buffer, a vital part of their sphere of influence. Ukraine, however, saw things differently. They were a sovereign nation, free to choose their own destiny. Many Ukrainians yearned for the economic prosperity and democratic freedoms offered by the EU, and some even for the security guarantees of NATO. This internal struggle played out in Ukrainian politics for years. In 2004, the world watched as Ukraine experienced its first major turning point, the Orange Revolution. Widespread protests erupted after a presidential election marred by allegations of fraud, ultimately leading to a rerun. This was a victory for democratic forces, a sign that the Ukrainian people would not be easily manipulated. It was also a clear signal of Ukraine's Western leanings, and for Russia, a worrying precedent. Viktor Yanukovych, the pro-Russian candidate who was initially declared the winner, eventually lost the rerun but would later become president in 2010. His presidency became a tightrope walk between Ukrainian aspirations and Russian pressure. The tension was palpable, a low hum beneath the surface of everyday life. The pot was simmering, waiting to boil over. The year 2013. The air in Ukraine was thick with anticipation. President Yanukovych was poised to sign a landmark association agreement with the European Union, a deal that would symbolize Ukraine's decisive shift towards the West. It was a moment many Ukrainians had dreamed of. But then, at the 11th hour, Yanukovych abruptly backed out. The pressure from Moscow had become too great. Putin had offered a huge loan and cheaper gas, threatening economic retaliation if Ukraine signed with the EU. Yanukovych chose Russia, and that's when the streets of Kiev exploded. What began as peaceful student protests in Maidan Nezalezhnosti, Independence Square, quickly morphed into a nationwide revolution. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians, outraged by the betrayal and yearning for a European future, filled the square. They demanded democracy, dignity, and an end to corruption. The government responded with brutal force. Riot police, known as Berkut, violently attacked protesters. But the people didn't back down. The clashes grew increasingly violent, culminating in February 2014, when snipers opened fire on protesters, killing dozens. The images were horrifying, beamed around the world. Faced with overwhelming public anger and a collapsing government, Yanukovych fled Kiev for Russia. For Ukraine, it was the revolution of dignity, a heroic stand for self-determination. For Russia, it was a Western-backed coup, an illegal overthrow of a legitimate, if corrupt, leader. The stage was set for a terrifying escalation. Within days of Yanukovych's flight in late February 2014, strange things began to happen in Crimea, a Ukrainian peninsula with a majority Russian-speaking population and home to Russia's Black Sea Fleet. Unmarked soldiers wearing green uniforms but no insignia began appearing. They were heavily armed, highly disciplined. The world soon dubbed them Little Green Men. Russia denied they were their troops, but it was an open secret. These Little Green Men swiftly took control of key strategic points, government buildings, and military bases. Under their watchful eyes, a lightning-fast referendum was organized, supposedly showing overwhelming support for Crimea to join Russia. The international community, including Ukraine, condemned it as illegal, a sham vote held at gunpoint. Despite the condemnation, in March 2014, Russia formally annexed Crimea. It was a brazen land grab, a direct violation of international law and the very security assurances Russia had given Ukraine in 1994. The world watched in disbelief, issuing sanctions that, at the time, seemed limited. But the horror wasn't confined to Crimea. In eastern Ukraine, in the regions of Donetsk and Luhansk, pro-Russian separatists, heavily backed and eventually overtly supported by Russia, began to seize government buildings and declare people's republics, the DPR and LPR. They demanded independence from Kiev or even annexation by Russia. What followed was the war in Donbass, a brutal, grinding conflict that lasted for 8 long years. Ukrainian forces fought fiercely to regain control, but they faced well-armed and often directly supported Russian proxy forces. Villages were shelled, cities divided by trenches, and over 14,000 people were killed in a frozen conflict that simmered, constantly threatening to explode. This period also saw the horrific downing of Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 in July 2014, a civilian airliner shot down over the conflict zone, killing all 298 on board, widely attributed to a Russian-supplied missile system. Multiple attempts at peace, notably the Minsk agreements, Minsk I in 2014, Minsk II in 2015, were signed, aiming for ceasefires and political settlements. But they were never fully implemented, constantly violated, and often served only to solidify the front lines, turning the conflict into a grinding stalemate. The world sighed in relief that a full-scale war had been averted, but for those living in Donbass, the war was a daily reality. For years, the Donbass conflict festered, a constant wound on Ukraine's body. But as 2021 drew to a close, a chilling new chapter began. Russian troops, tanks, and artillery started gathering on Ukraine's borders, not just in the east, but to the north in Belarus and to the south in Crimea. The scale was unprecedented, a massive military buildup that sent shivers down the spines of intelligence agencies worldwide. The world watched, bewildered and terrified. Russia claimed it was just military exercises, but the sheer size and nature of the deployment suggested something far more sinister. Diplomacy went into overdrive. World leaders flew to Moscow trying to avert a catastrophe. The US and its allies shared intelligence, warning that an invasion was imminent, even detailing the likely invasion routes. Russia dismissed it all as Western hysteria. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin delivered a series of chilling speeches. He denied Ukraine's right to exist as a sovereign nation, calling it an artificial creation of Soviet times. He spoke of historical grievances, of a perceived existential threat from NATO, and demanded security guarantees that amounted to halting any future NATO expansion and rolling back its presence in Eastern Europe. For many, it was clear these were pretexts for something far larger. Then, in the early hours of February 24, 2022, the nightmare became a terrifying reality. Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Missiles rained down on Ukrainian cities, airfields, and military installations across the country. Russian ground forces poured across the borders from multiple directions, the north towards Kiev, the northeast towards Kharkiv, and the south towards Mariupol and Kherson. The world woke up to the largest conflict in Europe since World War II. Shock, disbelief, and a wave of raw fear swept across the globe. Many predicted Kiev would fall in days, perhaps hours. Russian propaganda touted a special military operation to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, a twisted justification that appalled the international community. But Ukraine, against all odds, did not collapse. President Volodymyr Zelensky, instead of fleeing, stood firm in Kiev, rallying his nation with defiant speeches. Ordinary Ukrainians, from grandmothers to IT specialists, took up arms, joining territorial defense forces. Farmers used tractors to tow away abandoned Russian tanks. The bravery was astounding, the resistance fierce and unexpected. The world responded with a wave of unprecedented sanctions against Russia, targeting its economy, banks, and oligarchs. Western nations, shedding their initial hesitation, began to pledge and then deliver significant military aid, anti-tank missiles, air defense systems, and humanitarian assistance. The battle for Ukraine was also a battle for hearts and minds, and Ukraine was winning the narrative war. The initial phase of the invasion was a brutal test of wills. The Russian push towards Kiev was met with fierce and desperate Ukrainian resistance. Supply lines stretched, units stalled. Russian paratroopers landed near Hostomel Airport, hoping to secure an air bridge, but were repelled. The legendary 40-mile Russian convoy heading towards Kiev became a symbol of Russian logistical failures, stuck and vulnerable. By early April 2022, after suffering heavy losses, Russia was forced to retreat from the north, abandoning its objective to capture Kiev and overthrow the government. It was a massive victory for Ukraine, a symbol of their unexpected resilience. But as Russian forces withdrew from areas around Kiev, the world saw the true horrors of the occupation. In towns like Bucha and Irpin, evidence of Russian war crimes emerged: mass graves, civilians executed with hands tied behind their backs, widespread torture, and sexual violence. The images were sickening, sparking global outrage and solidifying international resolve against Russia. These weren't just military targets. They were atrocities against humanity. Having failed to take Kiev, Russia shifted its focus. Their new objective: to fully capture the Donbass region in the east and secure a land bridge to Crimea in the south. The city of Mariupol, a strategic port city on the Sea of Azov, became the epicenter of a brutal, months-long siege. Russian forces indiscriminately bombed civilian areas, including a maternity hospital and a theater explicitly marked with children that was sheltering hundreds. The city was reduced to rubble, its citizens trapped without food, water, or electricity. Thousands of civilians died. Ukrainian defenders, including the Azov Regiment, fought to the last, holed up in the Azovstal steel plant, a sprawling industrial complex, before finally surrendering in May 2022. Mariupol's fall was a devastating blow, but its defense had tied up significant Russian forces, buying crucial time for other Ukrainian cities. Throughout the spring and summer of 2022, intense fighting raged in the Donbass. It was an artillery duel, a brutal war of attrition. But as Western military aid began to flow, advanced artillery systems like HIMARS, anti-tank weapons, drones, Ukraine started to gain an edge. In the late summer and fall of 2022, Ukraine launched two stunning counteroffensives. First, a carefully telegraphed offensive in the south towards Kherson, drawing Russian forces there. Then, a lightning-fast surprise offensive in the Kharkiv region in the northeast. Ukrainian forces shattered Russian lines, liberating thousands of square kilometers of occupied territory, pushing Russian forces back to their own border in some areas. It was a strategic masterpiece, a morale booster for Ukraine, and a humiliating defeat for Russia. In response to these setbacks, Russia announced a partial mobilization of reservists in September 2022, a controversial move that led to hundreds of thousands of Russian men fleeing the country. Putin also declared the annexation of 4 partially occupied Ukrainian regions, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, after sham referendums, further escalating the conflict and cementing Russia's maximalist goals. The year ended with Russia facing a resurgent Ukraine, but also a new strategy. Relentless missile and drone attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, plunging cities into darkness and cold during winter, a cruel attempt to break the civilian population's will. As winter approached, the war settled into a grueling stalemate along much of the front line, particularly in the east. The city of Bakhmut became a symbol of this brutal attrition, a meat grinder where both sides suffered immense casualties for incremental gains. Russian forces, heavily reliant on the Wagner mercenary group, threw wave after wave of soldiers into the urban ruins. The battle lasted for months, turning the city into a desolate wasteland. Meanwhile, the flow of Western military aid became critical. Debates raged in Western capitals about sending more advanced weapons, tanks, long-range missiles, fighter jets. Each decision was a difficult one, balancing the need to help Ukraine defend itself against the risk of escalating the conflict directly with NATO. Gradually, these advanced systems began to arrive, transforming Ukraine's capabilities. In mid-2023, Ukraine launched its much-anticipated counteroffensive. After months of preparation and receiving new Western equipment, hopes were high for a breakthrough. However, Russian forces had spent months fortifying their positions, digging vast networks of trenches, anti-tank ditches, and minefields. The counteroffensive proved to be incredibly difficult, yielding only limited territorial gains at a high cost. The world watched, perhaps with too much expectation, as Ukraine struggled against deeply entrenched defenses. The war evolved. Drone warfare became paramount, with both sides utilizing commercial and military drones for reconnaissance, artillery spotting, and even direct attacks using FPV, first-person view, drones. Long-range strikes deep behind enemy lines became more common, hitting supply depots, command centers, and even targets within Russia. On the Black Sea, Ukraine, despite having a tiny navy compared to Russia, achieved remarkable successes. Using innovative naval drones and anti-ship missiles, they systematically pushed back Russia's Black Sea fleet, sinking or damaging numerous warships, including the flagship Moskva. This allowed Ukraine to create a maritime corridor for grain exports, vital for global food security, despite Russia's attempts at a blockade. As of early June 2025, the war remains a brutal, grinding conflict. The front lines have largely stabilized, but intense fighting continues daily. Neither side has achieved a decisive breakthrough. Russia continues its relentless missile and drone attacks on Ukrainian cities and infrastructure. Ukraine, though facing challenges with personnel and ammunition, continues to hold the line and conduct long-range strikes. One of the most pressing issues for Ukraine is the continued and consistent flow of Western aid. Delays in critical aid packages, particularly from the United States due to political infighting, have severely impacted Ukraine's ability to maintain its defense and launch new offensives. European nations have stepped up their contributions, but the scale of the conflict demands a truly global effort. The humanitarian impact of this war is immense. Millions of Ukrainians have been displaced, becoming refugees across Europe. Cities lie in ruins. The psychological scars will last for generations. The evidence of war crimes continues to mount, with international investigations underway to hold perpetrators accountable. The Russia-Ukraine war is not just a regional conflict. It's a tremor that has shaken the foundations of the global order. Its implications are vast and far-reaching. Geopolitical shifts * NATO, once questioned, has found renewed purpose and unity, expanding with the accession of Finland and Sweden. The European Union has shown unprecedented solidarity, moving closer to Ukraine's eventual membership. Russia has become more isolated on the world stage, relying heavily on a few allies like China and Iran. Energy security * Europe's reliance on Russian gas was brutally exposed. Nations scrambled to find alternative energy sources, accelerating the transition to renewables, but also causing temporary energy price spikes. Food security * Ukraine, a major global breadbasket, saw its grain exports disrupted by the war, triggering fears of famine in vulnerable nations, particularly in Africa and the Middle East. The Black Sea Grain Initiative was a critical, though fragile, effort to alleviate this crisis. International law and order * Russia's blatant violation of international law, invading a sovereign nation, annexing territory, committing war crimes, has challenged the very principles of the post-World War II world order. The response to this aggression will shape future international relations. Military lessons * The war has provided invaluable, often brutal, lessons in modern warfare, the importance of drones, precision artillery, adaptive logistics, and the power of motivated defense against a larger foe. It's prompted a reevaluation of military doctrines worldwide. Information warfare * propaganda, disinformation, and cyberattacks have played a significant role, blurring the lines between truth and falsehood, highlighting the critical importance of reliable information. So here we stand, deeply immersed in a conflict that continues to defy expectations. The war in Ukraine is a testament to the enduring human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds, but also a chilling reminder of the destructive power of ambition and historical grievance. Thousands have died, millions have been displaced, and the costs, human, economic, and psychological, are almost impossible to calculate. The future remains uncertain. Will there be a negotiated peace, and if so, on what terms? Will Ukraine regain all its occupied territories? What will be the long-term consequences for Russia, for Europe, and for the world? There are no easy answers, only difficult questions that will shape our collective future. This war is not just about land. It's about principles, sovereignty, and the very definition of a nation in the 21st century. As this history continues to unfold before our eyes, it is our duty to watch, to learn, and to remember. Because only by understanding the past and the present can we hope to build a more secure future. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into one of the most critical events of our time. If you found this explanation helpful, please hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to the channel for more explorations into the fascinating and often terrifying pages of history. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and never stop seeking the truth.